All right, I do believe we are live. I hope we are live. We're probably live. We are most likely live. Welcome, everybody, to the Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and I'm still not sure if we are live. Let me go in here and see what's going on. Are we live? Can we be live? Let's see.
I think we are.
Yes, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Yes, welcome, everybody, to the Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, at LevPo on Twitter. Giovanni Pennacchietti, Sultan of Swing, the original gangster, right over here with the beautiful, felines.
Too sweet.
With the beautiful felines. And speaking of beautiful, we got default friend camera view for the very first time on Break the Rules.
No, it wasn't
Break the Rules
I think
first.
The first time she came on, she had her camera.
Wait, really? Oh,
yeah.
well.
Usually what I do is I'll turn my camera on like halfway through for a minute and then I'll hide again.
All right, you broke the illusion, Gio.
Go back to the anime app.
I wanted this to be special, and now you ruined it. Anyway, we got Steve Dean in the house. Now, the reason why I met Jules P. Hamilton is because of Steve Dean right here. I originally met both of them actually at this New York City get-together with these kind of tech-related young people. Like, Steve, what's the best way to describe the kind of crowd that you hang out in?
The only unifying feature is that they're people who can have a 4+ hour long conversation. So it's just a space where if you want to talk and have no obstructions to that conversation, then this is it.
That sounds similar to BTR. By the way, speak up a little bit louder because you're right before the yellow. Anyway, we are speaking about dating today and about relationships. The two kind of go hand in hand together. And Steve, you are a dating and relationship coach and default friend. You are the host of After the Orgy podcast. Highly recommend everybody check it out. And let's start with Steve. When we're talking about dating today with all these apps that we have, how do you see it as being different from, let's say, the traditional drinking the milkshake dating that I have in that thumbnail, that picture, which I really like? But, like, what are the biggest differences that you personally see? What are the pluses? What are the minuses? But you know what, actually, before that, I want to just give an intro to you. Just, like, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a digital nomad, if that title still applies. And just give a brief summary of who you are and your thoughts on the dating scene.
Sure. So I've been thinking about dating for about 10 years straight, and I dove straight into it out of college and ended up being a nomad, but also a dating consultant pretty early on, because I was traveling from city to city, recognizing that even as I found and looked for housing, looked for work, looked for people to date, that all the people around me had the same three major concerns, which is like, where do I live, where do I work, and who do I date? I started a startup trying to match people to jobs as my first thing, but then I realized that it's kind of very similar to matching people to one another. And most online dating apps try to emulate that process a little bit, where you have like your vetting, like looking at profiles. You have and that's kind of like you're looking at people's resumes essentially. Then you have this process of going back and forth, trying to see if there's a fit, if we have the same long and short-term objectives. So if anyone's been through a recruiting process or hiring process, you know, it can be kind of agonizing. Luckily for dating, it doesn't suck quite as much when you're in that vetting process. You can actually go on some pretty good dates in the process, meet some fun people, although you may have a few kind of crap dates along the way. And then at the end of the day, I think what keeps drawing me in is this idea that the technology is supposed to be helping us meet people faster and make the people that we meet be more relevant to us. And it's kind of both a blessing and a curse that as our ads get more and more attuned to who we are and who we like, the dating apps don't necessarily do quite as good a job at putting right in front of us like the people who are most relevant in that time, because they have a vested interest in us staying on the platform, swiping more, wasting more time.
Here's, by the way, this is from your site, Date Working, which dating app is right for you. So I'm not sure if these are all of the apps that are out there, but this is quite a big list.
These are not by any stretch of the imagination all of them. There's over 2,000 out there, and a large majority are pure scams, so you got to watch out for those. If you've heard of it, chances are it's a little bit safer. the ones I put up there are the ones that I would most frequently either recommend or come across. And I think the main thing to remember is that dating apps are designed to expedite the process. So like rather than, let's say you show up in a new city, you can go into one bar at a time, one date at a time, one meet cute at a time. Like that can take you weeks or months or years to ultimately meet even like a few dozen people. Whereas if you use dating apps, like you can show up before you even show up in the city, you can have already been matching with people from that city on the app ahead of time, such that from day one, you can just show up on your date. I've literally gone into a new country and been on a date within an hour. So like, it's kind of amazing that apps have made it that easy. But the challenge is that when it's so easy, a lot of people get a little bit lazy and don't try very hard. And then you end up with just a lot of misaligned expectations. So that's kind of where the industry is now. It's trying to make it ever easier for people with limited attention to go and date. But the challenge is that when no one's giving you that much attention, every single interaction feels that much more superficial and boring.
Well, now let's, and thank you very much for that, let's move things to Default Friend's opinion of the dating scene, of the dating apps, and in general, like, what are your thoughts on...
Famous and infamous for shredding, what was that dating app?
Oh, Bumble.
Bumble. Yeah, it was on the tip of my tongue. I was going to say Mingle, but Bumble. Yeah, you absolutely decimated them, so... Total assault.
I mean, look, it's hard to talk about dating just because I feel like every individual sort of lives in a different reality, right? Like the situation for dating for like me is probably different than it is for Lev and Gio. Like everyone has their own. Look, I'm not trying to be mean here, but I'm saying that
That's true. That's true.
But it's
wait. Just so Steve understands, Gio, if it's okay with you, like what exactly we're alluding to here.
Well, we have a pretty broad spectrum on the show today of people who have a lot of dating experience and people who have none or zero or close to zero. So I think it's very interesting in a lot of ways. But anyways, we interrupted you, Default. So what were you going on about?
Well, it's just like I feel like there's so much conflict, partially because you can't really generalize because the advice that someone gives me is going to be very different than the advice someone gives you. And the advice someone gives me is going to be very different than the advice someone would give like Bimbo Ubermensch, right? Like, to name another she's no longer on Twitter, but people know who she is, right? So it's hard to, I think that's why there's a lot of fights because it's a very emotional, painful part of people's lives for the most part. And everyone has a different experience. And where you live, too, impacts that quite a bit, too.
But when it comes to the overall, and I guess it's difficult to put so many people in the box and say, this is the problem that's going on with this amount of people. But since this is something that I see tackled many times, because we're always going to have people that figure out ways to thrive in whatever environment you put them into. But then you're going to have other people that may have been used to a different kind of way of life that are now thrust into this new world. So I'm curious, Default Friend, if you could talk a little bit about that side of it, and then I'd love to hear from Steve.
Yeah, I mean... I think a lot of people don't use apps correctly. I don't wholesale hate apps. I met my boyfriend on Hinge. But also like, I don't think either of us were like shopping. I think it was sort of like, we're looking, we swipe sparingly and like each match is like, we take very seriously. It's like, I found that like my dating app experience was like very similar to like when you go to a department store and you need to buy shoes, but you already know like you need like sneakers and like, it's the sneakers that fit and you can afford. And then like you're not hanging out in the store. It's not a perfect analogy, right? Because like, I also think people run into this problem of having like too specific of a type, but like, I think people, I don't think anyone uses dating apps correctly. And I think that there's some people who aren't meant to use dating apps correctly. Like it's not easy for men, certainly. Like men are kind of forced to swipe right on everyone, and that's not really fair.
Steve, what do you think about the men forcing to swipe right on everyone?
So there's this company that lets you upload your Tinder data in order to find out and like assess, what are the probabilities of you having any success on here, given your location, your race, your gender, all those things. And one of the things that was really sad is that as of their latest calculation, I think men are left swipe, meaning they're rejected. If they're over 30, it's 99.9% of the time. And if they're under 30, it's
crap.
It's I believe 99% even, maybe like 98.5% of the time. And even like men who are doing the best on these platforms, they're still getting rejected over 60 to 70% of the time. So yes, the platforms in a way are severely stacked against your likely success if you're a male swiper. But I think one important thing to remember is that optimizing profiles is a thing that can happen. Like it's in the same way that like if you try to rank on Google, you're very likely to not be in the first several pages or several hundred pages. You'll just get left behind. But if you actually specialize and like really get good at the thing that you're good at, or the thing that you want to show to the world, then you can actually begin to rank higher up on Google. And so in a similar way, it is possible on a dating app for virtually any person to find the right combination of like app and your photos or videos that tell your story, a profile that captures, what's meaningful about you and what you want, such that someone can see it and decide that you're worth it for them. It's perfectly fine
for anyone though.
I mean, it's perfectly fine if 99.9% of people reject you if you're looking for one person, because what matters is that you get matched to that one person, and it is ultimately the responsibility of the app to ensure through their algorithms and through their user growth that they help get that person on there. So it is, at the end of the day, a matter of app choice and profile design, photo selection, messaging, date ideas. Like there's a lot in the ultimate funnel that goes from like point A to point Z. But one of the things that I'm a little optimistic about is that you can do a lot to optimize the overall experience. But that doesn't mean that for the vast majority of people, they're not going to see misery most of the time.
But it just sounds like pardon my cynicism, but I think that the language used to describe like when people what is that term that Tinder uses for users that are like they pay money and they like are really into it? What do they call those, alpha users or something? I don't know. But it seems like this very like gamified like tech bro lingo over something that is, or rather maybe this is an idealized picture, but something that should be like very how shall I put it? Very like unique to the human experience that is being like quantified. It's almost like playing a freemium game on your phone now. It's like if you're really addicted to like certain metrics, and it's very much like a meeting of different forces of like Silicon Valley, like Californian ideology, but also like I would say the developments in things like psychotherapy and like the therapy industrial complexes. Like I know they use a lot of similar sort of tactics to keep you motivated into like quote unquote leveling up, right? Like even like the term leveling up itself just denotes like a total like homo economicus gamification towards intimacy and relationships.
Except when it's used for my name. That's the only exception.
Yeah.
Leveling up. But no, that's a
oh
good
my
point.
God, you and the puns, Lev.
That's a good point that Gio brings up right now.
Bro.
I mean, when it comes to, there's this chart, I don't remember where I saw it, but it has, for example, men and women ranked to 1 to 10. And it shows the men that are at the level of like 5 and 6 being totally ignored. Only like the 8, 9, 10s are the ones that are not ignored. They're the ones that kind of get the most women. And the question that's constantly being brought up is, and maybe it's brought up by people who are not that successful when it comes to dating and relationships, but it's still being brought up, which is what is going to happen now that something has occurred that has never occurred before, if they're right that it hasn't occurred before, where now all of a sudden there's all of these men, that's small amount of men that women think that they're going to be able to have a relationship with, and then there's all the men in the bottom that get totally left out, like you were talking about before. Does this end up creating, and has it already created in a way, a kind of dystopia? I don't want to be too overly dramatic here, but as far as what is going to happen to the men who are without now, not just that, but relationships and marriage and kids and families and society, like all that could be stacked up on top of all of these problems we may be seeing right now, again, unless this is something that occurred, way back when in a different way. So curious. Actually, let's start with Default Friend. Do you agree with that notion? And then let's go to Steve.
Yeah, I mean, especially part of the problem is like with dating, we usually hear from people in like, in big coastal cities. And those are probably the places where people have the most acute problems. Like my friends in Florida have a very different experience, but it's still difficult. So I think it's a mix. I think that it's true for a lot of young people, but it's not universally true. And that's why like geography really plays in. The thing, part of the reason I think that my Floridian friends have a different situation though is because even though they're using Tinder and Hinge and whatever, they're still operating like very small towns where they don't obviously like literally know everyone, but there's like a familiarity that doesn't really exist in a more transitory place. So yeah, I mean, I'm more inclined to agree with it though, especially for the purposes of like universalized advice.
And before Steve, can you sum up, because I talked a mouthful right now, can you in a way sum up what you foresee as being the worst case scenario that's either already happening now or will happen in a couple of years? That's for Default Friend.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to say much about this, right? Just partially because like it really does feel so different for everyone. I mean, so I came onto this like I really agreed with sort of like the incel black pill, but as I like move around the country, my perspective has changed quite a bit.
So it's the different places in the country that give you hope. That's interesting. Would you say that there's something that they share in common, the places that give you hope versus the places that give you dread, existential dread?
I mean, like there's no hope in like California. I mean, San Francisco specifically, probably LA is really difficult. New York, I would say is probably really difficult. I've noticed that the people I know who have the least problems dating are people who've stayed in the same like mid-sized city, suburb, or rural area most of their life, or in that same basic area, which is why I think the Midwest is interesting, because people like not everyone's from Chicago, right? But a lot of people are from like Indianapolis and they move to Chicago, and it's less extreme than like being from Arizona and moving to New York.
Interesting. And Steve, do you agree with Default Friend's statement about California and New York? Are they doomed?
We'd have to qualify that, because if you are, let's say, like a straight male dating in California and you switch your location to New York, you might see a 20-fold rise in matches instantly. And so you go from feeling like there are no prospects, there's no one who you care, like maybe there's people you care about, but you match with no one, to suddenly you getting, you're not only matching with 4, 5, 10 times the number of people, but you're also getting messages, which is, like the night and day experience that you can have simply by switching your location. And so I think it's kind of important, as Default Friend noted, that like location is a really salient factor for your likelihood of finding what you're looking for. And it also goes without saying that like if you go to let's say you're into a certain set of specific kinks and you try to find them in a town of 100,000 versus a city of 10 million, like it's such a different experience. And when you then use the power of dating apps to laser in on people who share, whether it be kinks or relationship paradigm preferences or just favorite kinds of date ideas, like there's so many different ways you can align with someone that when you go to a place with a higher population density, it just makes it that much easier for the apps to do their work.
Do you suggest people align themselves based on their kinks? Like go.
I don't recommend that as like if you're looking for your forever partner, you have to make that decision for yourself, whether they need to share a specific kink or whether you can either forego it or find satisfaction elsewhere if it's something that, let's say, only exists in 0.1% of the population. So that you always have options there. I generally factor in, like what you're actually looking for as like you're the end user, because some people are looking for a hookup tonight. Some people are looking for a marriage within the next 24 hours if possible, because they wanted to have kids 5 years ago. So there's just so much variation there that, I'm a coach, so I have to constantly think about not, what is statistically probable and what is happening now, but also what do you actually want here? Because I can't project any of my shit onto you. It's really important to find out and question it too. If what someone desires seems like directly out of line with what they're likely to find, then I can we can go into troubleshooting mode and think about, like, if that is indeed the desire and that's a deal breaker, then do we have to get you to move? Do we have to change your location on the app? Are you willing to fly someone out here in order to date them? There's a lot of variables that go into it.
I have a question for you, and I'm sorry for like taking the reins so much, Lev. I'll go back on.
Take the reins as much as you want. I want to bring the fire here, so go for it.
I mean, like, what do you tell people who are like legit, like, especially young men who are probably like, either too, downwardly mobile, let's say, or like just straight up like too ugly for apps? Because I feel like that's a huge thing that like nobody wants to face and say out loud. Like, being ugly fucking sucks. It's hard for people. It's, I get in trouble anytime I say this, but a lot of people are too ugly. It really is painful. I'm not saying I get in trouble because I say it and people are like, oh, you could say that as a woman. And I'm like, well, like, what the fuck,
there are ugly women, but they do. I mean, I guess they could pull something. That's kind of, I don't think every, if you're like a disfigured woman, you're like missing your nose or something's doing a car accident, like you're fucked. Right?
Well, you remember that Sopranos episode with the one leg, that lady?
Oh, but that was an asset to Tony because he was talking about it was easier access. He was like, yeah, it's easier access. Remember?
Okay.
I have a photographic memory of Sopranos quotes. I'm sorry.
Yes, you do. Steve, what do you think? The ugly question.
I think that I've now looked at 500,000 or more dating profiles. And I think what stands out to me is that ugliness isn't so much endemic to your DNA or to your skin texture, color, whatever. It's frequently tied to your entire presentation throughout a profile. And so you can be generically attractive, but put up terrible photos that don't show you in a flattering light, or maybe they show you in a light you think is flattering, but to the average user, they see that and they're like, what on earth is this person trying? Why did they put up 8 selfies in a row from the exact same angle? This makes them seem addled in some way. Or you can be extremely attractive and put up photos that someone took when you were like midway through eating a sandwich or doing something that just like made the viewer a little bit confused. So I think that your overall presentation is very important. And it's also fully possible to find people who don't care as much about looks. And so if you really think that looks are not your strongest suit and that you're going to be a little bit screwed over in a visual first medium like modern dating apps, there are dating apps that have allowed for you to not have the requirement of a profile picture. Some of them allow for a blurred photo. Some allow for videos. So this goes to another point that I was going to make earlier, which is that there's an overall struggle. I want to like situate us in like what's happening at a large scale in the dating industry, because I consult for founders pretty regularly. And so what I hear from them is like, okay, I'm launching this app and I'm like, I have this niche that I wanted to appeal to. I wanted to help these people. And their goal is to essentially get users' attention, get them to sign up, get them to like do the thing, like go meet someone. But the challenge here is that the average user attention can be minimal. They might give you 5 minutes a week on the app. And in those 5 minutes, you had to get them to upload several different photos that showcase a story of their lives and in a compelling way. You had to get them to potentially fill out paragraphs worth of profile information or answer up to 100 or more profile questions. And you may not get that for weeks from a user. And another challenge is if you don't deliver for that user, they may just never open your app again. And so it's very likely that a dating app that just launched can lose 90% of the users it gained in the first month by the end of that first month, because attrition can be extremely high if you're not pulling people back in, which gets us into this attention game where so many dating apps now are motivated to hold your attention and keep it there in order to show to their investors, look, we have these engaged users, you should give us more money. Or if users are sufficiently engaged, maybe then they'll pay. So from the app maker perspective, it's a really difficult effort. Like the effort to succeed is extraordinarily difficult, because you have to get people's attention, keep their attention, potentially when they're not receiving the reciprocal attention they wanted on your app in the first place. And potentially if the actual UX patterns that you've built in, like maybe they don't work very well. And so when you have a lot of users who are struggling with getting attention from other people because maybe they didn't put together the strongest profile, maybe their looks aren't putting them in whatever the top percentage of people who are going to succeed on this app, they need some extra help. They could use significant extra help when it comes to crafting their story and putting together a presentation. And sometimes the app itself just will fail them, because if it's an app that, given what spread there is in terms of available dating apps, there's video first, there's some that let you send only audio messages. There's some that force you to meet right up front without knowing anything about the person and then have you ask questions later. Some of them have profiles that are only live for an hour, so you can essentially like meet someone, go hook up, and then never have to hear from them again. Then there's some that ask you 4,000 questions about who you are. So like, given how much variation there is, it's hard for users to even know, like, where do I go? Where do I fit? And
I don't mean to bring this meme up specifically in relation to what you were talking about, but I think
there is such a thing, I will point out, as voice physiognomy as well. That is another thing.
But in relation to this particular
so it's
meme
like the
here,
audio message.
In relation to this meme, the idea is that while you are right, people can do all kinds of things to spruce themselves up.
Is that Yanduri Dev on the other side, or is that another guy?
I have no idea. But people can do all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have people out there who, let's say, are going to be average to low, and the question is, are we at the situation when it comes to, like Default Friends said, in certain places this is not the case, but in the cases of the big competitive cities, that you're not really going to have people who maybe before would have been able to find somebody. And I'm not even talking about just having a quick porking. I'm talking about finding somebody to actually settle down with and have kids and all that all that good stuff. I think that seems to be like, Gio, you tell me, because you are within this world much more as far as people who see problems with where society is going.
I frequent incel.me. No, I'm kidding.
So can you break down like what the frustrations are here?
What do you mean? That's
frustrations,
a
not
question.
just in terms of dating apps, because I think we have a good idea of the app world right now, but more in the realm of dating to relationship to family pipeline. Has the pipeline been severed? You know,
there's no radicalization that way, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't possibly. The short answer, I guess, would be a variety of like cultural and socioeconomic reasons and just I think maybe the dating apps themselves has sort of done a particular job. And again, like this is old territory for Default because she talks about this quite a bit, but they've done a job in sort of gearing people towards certain forms of interaction and almost in a way stigmatizing older forms of actually like, you know, just go up and talk to her bro, I guess. I mean, but deeper than that, I think that it's just the fundamental nature of like modernity itself is geared towards certain outcomes. And it's almost like we're seeing like a weird return of like a Pareto arrangement where like a few men at the top can have the pick of the litter, but the vast majority, particularly I notice of young men and some young women as well, they've sort of been left out of the equation for a variety of reasons. Like even just, I know it's true that perhaps if you persist, sorry, my cat likes to claw at me sometimes. If you persist, but I still think that the looks baxing thing, there at least is something there. I think that because apps are so visually orientated, that and because people are no longer situated within a particular community, you have this very vicious like cycle of hacking like the human response to things like intimacy and connection and emotion into a way that is very like almost pornographic in nature. But I mean like the broader sense of pornographic, not just erotica. I mean like the sort of gratuitousness of flicking like I don't know, what is it, swipe left or swipe right, whatever, right? Like it's, I don't even know, that's how terribly out of touch I am. But you know what I mean. That's yeah.
I know, Steve, what do you think? And default friend as well.
I guess for me, I frequently approach dating as though it's just a really large math equation. It's a question of like, what's the likelihood when you meet someone, your probability that you're going to hit it off, and then how many people in a week are you even exposed to that you could meet? How many people are you put into a context with where you'd be looking at each other in a way that might imply something more than the thing at hand? So like you can be on a work trip and you may find someone that you've had a thing for a while, and then you give each other the look midway through the work trip and you're like, oh, okay, there's something here. It could be something that happens in a library, in a cafe, in a, walking down the street. There's still plenty of opportunities to engage with people. And there's plenty of opportunities for our friends to refer us people, to like bring them to a game night or bring them to dinner or show up at the same movie theater for something. There's like millions of ways we can still meet people. And I'm not yet convinced that those are gone from us, although I do recognize that there has in recent years been a strong set of deterring factors against modern pickup and against just really, really terrible efforts at getting other people's attention. So like the anti-catcalling culture, I think it's great. I love that we are opposing the laziness of
as
men.
a Mediterranean, I disagree 100%.
And that has nothing to do with dating, like that.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. If you're getting catcall sorry, default, go ahead.
Being anti-catcalling, it does like this weird thing. Like it removes it. So it removes something that is like a nuisance, that is more about like men bonding with each other than actually like there's a great Sex and the City episode about this where like they catcall like Samantha or Miranda or something, and she turns around and she's like,
contest to be like, yeah, I think I saw.
And she's like, I will fuck you, and they're like, well, that's not why we're catcalling you. Like they're catcalling so they can bond, right? But when you say that these men can't do that, it has like a weird effect where it's like, now men think that like everything is harassment. So by removing catcalling, you also remove like, nagging someone in a good-natured way at a bar, which probably like in some cases would lead you to a relationship or just getting laid. So I don't think it's not actually good. It's like very confused and weird.
Steve, what do you think?
I disagree. I think that catcalling is directly harmful in virtually all scenarios. It's especially in North America. I think that south of the border, where there's a slightly different culture, it's not overtly considered street harassment. It can be considered part of the effort of making someone, hear that you have an interest in them. But the challenge of doing that in at least contemporary American culture is that there comes with so much of a threat of violence if the person being catcalled refuses the unwanted attention.
Wait. Let me just. Oh, sorry. Did you finish your point? I'm sorry, cut you off.
I want to make it very clear that tact still exists in our species. We can still you can walk into a room, read the room, understand who's talking to who, take 5 seconds to actually assess what's happening before you just blurt out the first thing in your mind just because someone you were attracted to walks by. I think like the modern, or not even modern, the way that men tend to take up space is it needs to die. It needs to fully disappear. The way that I've had someone, like if I walk behind a woman, men will look at her and catcall her, not acknowledging, like if I'm far enough behind, they'll be able to say, like, she becomes essentially untethered property. It's disgusting that men find it acceptable to just call out to her and make her feel uncomfortable. simply because they're lonely or bored or horny or trying to impress their friends. I don't care what the reason is. It's simply unacceptable.
Well, no, I disagree with you that it's some North American. In fact, I would say that it's probably less likely that it carries any sort of serious implications in particularly like North American or maybe Scandinavian societies. But if you go to, like, for example, if you go to South America, Europe, especially certain parts of Europe, I mean, catcalling is quite vicious and quite frequent and quite invasive compared to even in American larger cities. I think that it comes from maybe like a romantic, like tourist picture of Italy in particular, to say that the catcalling is like this very, I don't know, it's part of the experience sort of thing. But in terms of like male space, I mean, I don't know. I think that women as well have their own maybe more subtle ways of objectification, but it's not, of course, it's not as aggressive as like some man that would catcall women. But I don't know. I don't see the epidemic the way it was maybe 15 or even 10 years ago. I think that a lot of men are afraid, like as Default was saying, actually even afraid to look women in the eyes in the streets, you know. Even like I noticed myself, you instinctively like look down because the gaze is always like, you know, discouraged. But maybe that's my own perception being a product
Steve,
of the 2010s manosphere. I don't know.
What do you think of the male gaze?
The Berger male gaze.
In terms of whether or not it should be, you know, like deployed as a tactic, or
Sure, let's go from there. Yeah.
I think that at the human level, the basic building blocks of flirtation do involve eye contact and facial mirroring and a kindness, like a, you know, synchronicity of your vagal tone, a kindness and affect, like some measures that allow you to note that this person is not intending harm, along with some biosensory feedback that you are enjoying your time in this person's presence, which is once again why I think catcalling is ridiculous, because it involves virtually none of those. And so I think that we still have all the building blocks. Like they haven't left us. I think that the only thing that's happened is there's become a higher cost to doing things poorly, and that's made a lot of people very skittish about getting their start. So I guess what I see is just a need for wider scale education in the basics of human connection, because we're still really good at connecting at a species level. We can connect with virtually anyone we meet. If you put two people in a dark room, they'll probably begin talking, maybe even touching within a few minutes, because humans have an instinct. They're wired for connection. And so, yeah, it's a lot of the disconnection is a product of us spending either too much time behind a screen, where we are forcibly, I guess, de-dimensionalizing ourselves. Like we exist in many dimensions, and yet when we're behind a screen, it's forcing us through not just the dimension of like going into back to two dimensions, but then it strips even more away when you lose your voice, you lose your eye contact, you lose, and like maybe in a live video call you're a little better off, but you know when you're texting, is you just lose so that's like the lossiness of that communication channel is so intense that I think, you know, dating apps are able to make it a little bit better for us. And each time they try to add more dimensions, we typically fail. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried to make your own video profile, but that it's a shit show. So it's not like adding more dimensions is always better. Sometimes the simplicity can be nice. You know, like a handwritten letter can be a really nice thing. It's a pretty low on the dimensionality, but there's a lot to it.
I want to go on a bit of a tangent from here, but first, Default Friend, any thoughts on the catcalling, male gaze, all of this? Like, where do you stand in relation to what Steve talked about?
I have a question for Steve. In some place like, you know, and I'm just spitballing here, like Latin America, perhaps, where catcalling is more about like actually making a move on a woman. I'm just assuming based on what you said, as opposed to like a form of male bonding that gets like interpolated as coming onto a woman. Do women in those countries prefer more masculine men who might do something like catcalling, or do they prefer more demure American men who are afraid to?
I don't know that I can generalize in that regard, because each time I talk to a person, they have their own set of preferences and experiences, positive and negative, that go along.
But in general, like, are those men sexless in the same way American men seem to be?
Oh God, no.
All right. That's a point I'm trying to make. Like, are Italian men? How many Italian incels are there?
There's a
In
few
Italy.
though.
In Italy. You know?
Italy is not like the cornucopia of like the lower Haginal line anymore.
Okay,
can I even mention that on YouTube?
Sicily.
Yeah, well, maybe, but like the huge Italian family, unfortunately, is becoming a thing of the past. I hate to say it, but you know. So there could be Italian. But
I mean, there may be something there. I don't know, Steve. Like, what do you think of that?
Like, I've heard from women who have either lived in or still live in Latin America, as well as women in the US. Some of them prefer, like, they like the experience of being catcalled because if it's done in an appropriate way, like if they're out with their friends and someone whistles at them and says like nice dress, like if they specify the thing that, if it's not just like, oh, you appear to be a woman, therefore I'm catcalling you, like that's the shit kind. That's not going to work. But if you specify the thing that you like about someone, if they spent, like 25 hours putting their thoughts into their wardrobe, into the dress they choose, and then someone says, wow, amazing dress, like that's not really a catcall, that's just a compliment. And no one is going to walk down the street and be like, wow, I'm having a terrible day now that someone complimented this dress that I put a lot of thought into wearing. I think there is tact once again. But
wouldn't you say that a lot of times women, even if they're going out in what seems to be the dress of a slob, they still put attention towards their hair, towards their, skin, eyelashes, whatever. Like, it takes a long time for women to prepare to go out, even if it doesn't necessarily look like that from the beginning. So wouldn't you say that also adds maybe a little bit of a realm of catcalling certain features that women have tried very hard to accentuate, even if it may not appear, even if it may not be a beautiful red dress, for instance?
I mean, once again, if you meet someone who has put a lot of effort into their appearance, into making themselves a walking work of art, then like you can still mention that to them and compliment them for the effort that they put into what they did, and that still does not constitute catcalling someone. Like, catcalling is what it is because it is the lowest value form of human communication. It's terrible. It's one-sided communication of need. At no point were you reflecting on how this person might interpret it. At no point were you thinking about what the hell they've been going through that day that led them to be on that street at that time. You don't know, recent past experiences and headed future experiences. You're just shoving your needs out into someone's face in a way that is not just obnoxious, but also potentially harmful. So, and certainly psychologically can be harmful. And
but where's
Lev,
the
have you ever
line?
catcalled someone?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No.
Oh God.
Gio?
I guess working with the boys in construction, not directly, but you notice we had a code word, we called it chalk line. Hand me my chalk line, and then, but it was just never actually saying anything. It was just oh, look at that beautiful woman.
But so is
but
it
never
about
actively?
Yeah.
I've never
not towards the woman, but just more among yourself. You kind of see somebody and
never actually saying anything. I would never. No, that's not. That's not my style.
Well, why were you asking?
Although I've been on cruise. My old man's workers did. Yeah, that's well. My one friend actually ended up dating a person he catcalled on the job site. So if that makes, I don't know. So by dating I mean one night stand, but
same thing.
Oh, but go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess my question was I'm not convinced that catcalling is ever. I mean, it must be in some cases, but I'm just not convinced that when you comment on a woman, a woman walking by, you call her sugar tits or something, you're not actually trying to, you don't think you're gonna fuck that woman even, it's just
not necessarily
not
true. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Spencer Greenberg. He did a small study on essentially asking people who've catcalled why they did it, and then reiterating no, really, why did you actually do this? What did you think would come of it? And one of the most common responses was, I thought that this person would have sex. I wanted to have sex, and I thought this person would have sex with me if I did this. And so it surprisingly, I beg my species to be better than this and not have that be what they what they think is the logical conclusion, that if you like inject your opinion into someone's face as they're walking by, that suddenly they're going to want you.
But I think like it depends. I mean, this comes up even like on online spaces. Like I know, oh my God, I can't believe we're talking about this again. But like when we talk about like the quote unquote e-girl thing, it's like at the end of the day, like there was this great thread that actually compelled me to make a video on my own YouTube channel, giantproductions.com, on youtube.com, where I'm currently editing it, but it was about this thread by default. You follow her. What's her name? God something. You know what I'm talking about.
She's actually tuning. I saw her. She left a comment. She is tuning into the stream right now.
Going Godward. I have a video. If she is tuning in, let me tell you, I rip you to fucking shred. No, I'm kidding. I actually agree with this thread, but I use the French aesthete painter Toulouse-Lautrec as like an example of what she was talking about. But it was a great thread because like the replies were amazing. I mean, a lot of them were unfair because they were like, you know, accusing her of
But back to the subject at hand here.
Well, no, it's pertaining to it.
Okay,
it's about like the sort of the male gaze as an optical sort of the phenomenological male gaze as interpolating a woman as a pure sex object as opposed to someone who is of like a higher order of existence, almost like she was inkling at a like spiritual reality, something that like Emerson talked about when it comes to like all love is ultimately the higher love of God, right? But when you're talking about it and what she was talking about in the sort of relationship between like e-girls and OnlyFans and simps, and there's what I pointed out is that there's some element of reciprocity there that I think is different nowadays than maybe a woman walking down the street, obviously. But even a woman walking down the street, there is still a number of maybe unconscious sort of like sexual cues there that we don't act upon them, but there's something within our lizard brains that, if that makes sense. But at the same time, yeah, I understand like if some like burly construction worker comes up to you and, you know, to calls you sugar tits, I understand that's probably
like that video with Janet Jackson. You remember Nasty? That was a good music video.
Oh, yeah,
but remember it had like those gross construction guys. Although some of them were dancing, ballet. Surprisingly, they were really good. But anyway, when it comes to that differentiation between in South America versus here, I'm not exactly sure. But the tangent I kind of wanted to go on here was I see it being related to relationships too, because in general, Steve, my feeling from people who are within the New York sphere is that, especially today, not just in terms of relationships, but in general, I think there is way more self-censorship going on. Not in terms of just like, I don't want to say something that's going to make me out to be an asshole, but even, let's say, politically speaking, I'm going to be afraid of speaking my mind. I'm going to have to toe a certain line on right thing versus wrong thing, both for relationships as well as just work relationships. And I wonder what exactly the future is going to look like with social media not really stopping anytime soon. How much do you believe people are self-censoring themselves today? And what do you think this is going to turn the relationships of the future into? Because it seems like people do go into their own bubbles and start to kind of lie to themselves and maintain a certain image of what exactly they're supposed to believe in. But I don't know. It could be wrong. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Okay. So on one hand, I think public self-censorship is fantastic if that means that we will end catcalling. Because it's once, I hate to bring it back to this, but like women, if you ask them, especially in New York, they start getting catcalled at age like 8, 9, 10. Like, this is disgusting shit and needs to end. So like there is a degree to which censorship is fantastic because it means you're thinking before you speak and thinking before you act. And in the same way that I would love to see a world where we go after people who are, for instance, doing the raping rather than being raped, like we should not be requiring that people prevent harm from happening to themselves at all times, because in part that's like what the state is there to help us with.
Well, I don't know.
So,
I mean, that's an old debate that goes back to like God, the old manosphere days. But I think like I get what you're saying. I sympathize, but at the same time, I think everyone has sort of a duty towards their own self-protection, I guess, like men and women, because like it goes back, like statistically, the most violent interactions tend to happen between men. Like you're more at risk as a man walking down the ghetto. And I mean, where is the ghetto in New York, Lev, nowadays? It's not because it's so
probably
gentrified either way.
It's probably Brownsville and the areas around Brownsville. I'd say.
Is Long Island still terrible?
Certain parts of it closer to New York City. It really depends on the location. Actually, all New York is pretty terrible right now. I mean, Steve, let's be honest. The crimes increased.
You had to put that
There's homeless people everywhere. It's not great. It's not great what's going on right now. You really got to watch. It's like living in hard mode. You really got to watch your back.
Just to, like really quickly is just that I think maybe, I mean, everyone I think nowadays has to have some awareness of their surroundings, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, well, I don't want like, this is just like,
no, we've been
talking about this for fucking years now.
We've gone through the catcalling. Right now, what I do want to focus on, I want to bring it back to like when you do end up going on a date and then being in a relationship with somebody, that there is a degree of honesty. And again, my concern is that I think that people are lying to each other. I think they're lying to themselves because certain opinions just on, whatever, let's say in New York, and I'm sure maybe like in the South somewhere, it's the reverse. But if we're specifically talking about New York, whatever would be, I hate using the word woke, Steve. I'm sorry for using that word, but I don't really know how else to express it when it comes to certain opinions that you must have and you must abide by. Otherwise, you are kind of seen as a persona non grata among certain circles in New York City. And I think that does have a role to play in how relationships are formed and what people end up, how people end up acting in those relationships, what they allow themselves to express to their significant other. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that part of it.
Cool. Yeah. So first, New York, I find to be the safest it's ever been. I want to just throw that out there. I've never seen so many happy faces throughout the streets, outdoor dining everywhere. I feel safe no matter where I am walking around the city. And
well, I'm glad you're safe.
Experience right now.
I'm glad that's your experience right now.
Lev, maybe it's your inherent neuroticism that could be making you go. I'm sorry, bro.
So in terms of like
Soviet trauma.
Oh, inherited, yeah. Every single stream inherited Soviet trauma. Oh. Lev, don't you know that bread lines are nostalgic nowadays, Lev, and that it was community bonding in the bread lines? Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
So in terms of whether people's capacities for entering into happy, healthy relationships are being harmed because they're no longer able to present themselves in a certain way that is honest and true to them because they're afraid of what woke people might think or whether they're going to get killed in the DMs. I honestly don't think that's quite as big a deal as you may currently believe. It precisely because when you're on these dating apps, the goal is to get you paired off with someone. The more you put out of who you are, what you're about, what you want, the easier it is to quickly find someone who is going to be someone who wants you for the things you represent, the things you stand for. And it's very good, in fact, to have the people who strongly dislike you and don't want you in their lives to be able to skip you, because otherwise you're just wasting a lot of time in conversations that will eventually go pretty far south, if not immediately go pretty far south. So I just feel like in terms of living with integrity and transparency, it's better to put out as many of the deal breakers as you can up front, because it makes it that much easier to ensure that you're going to find someone who sees what you put there and actually wants that. However,
that's the hope. Yeah.
If you spend a lot of your time intentionally trying to be iconoclastic or to espouse views that are going to be counter-majoritarian, then it can be a little bit more difficult to put those in full form directly on your dating profile. In some cases, it may be the case that you might want to just use a different app in which it has a user base that's more likely to be geared toward the kind of beliefs that you have. And there has been a massive fragmentation in the dating market where there's lots of little apps that have, if you want someone who only shares your views and beliefs on astrology, there are at least 2 to 3 different astrology-only dating apps. For instance,
we need a MAGA MILF dating app. I would go on that. That would be my anyway.
That may exist. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. It's going to probably show up in one of my feeds in the next couple of days now that it's been mentioned.
There's this great quote this in the chat by the legendary Matt Forney. We were talking about young people meeting in public. Albania has a similar I don't know why I find this funny. Albania has a similar problem, which is why young couples often have sex in Hoxha era bunkers. So Hoxha, he was the communist, the leader of under Tito that like made a bunch of like bunkers that only like 1 or 2 people could go in. They weren't even practical. But like imagine like they become like bombed out like party like love-ins for young people in Albania. That's hilarious.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like default friend, what is your opinion on this self-censorship that I'm talking about here? Because while I would love for what Steve's talking about to be the case mostly, I hope it is. My thoughts are that it's probably the case that a lot of dudes are censoring themselves, putting on a persona, just because there's not going to be as many women who are going to agree with certain ideas they may have. I don't know.
I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of self-censorship. I mean, like, so full disclosure, I don't have like a ton of dating experience. I was married most of my 20s, and then I had a couple of short relationships, and now I'm in another very long relationship. But I think it was partially so easy for me because I'm not easily offended, at least with political beliefs. I'm easily offended in other ways, as some of your listeners might know. But and men were like, I finally, like, I can stop masking. Like, I don't think most men like any of this stuff, right? Like, they feel like they can't be themselves. And like, when people tell me I can be myself around you, they don't mean like I have special powers or I'm super special in any way. I think it's just because like they could be more masculine and I won't be like up their ass about it.
Someone said, I can't believe a guy would seek out an astrology dating app. I bet you would find some quality women on astrology dating apps.
Yeah. Opinion. Shout out to Michael Scotto, by the way.
I have a theory that you could red pill hippie girls, that it could be done. Because they already have this inherent spiritual impulse. So I guess maybe that could, I don't know.
Wait, I forget. Steve, do you know Michael Scotto or no?
Yeah. I'm a Capricorn, by the way.
So Michael Scotto is actually a regular on BTR. He does these astrology streams, and he's great. Everybody loves Michael. He's in Egypt right now, as a matter of fact. But anyway, yeah. But getting back to the subject at hand here. So, default friend, you think that guys do end up having to self-censor themselves a lot more today. And I just want to make sure I'm not mincing your words here. In general, you do believe that there's a lot more of that going on.
Totally. And I think there's that TikTok that went viral and it turned into like a meme format of like asking men their most controversial opinion, and then like women would sort of like roll their eyes and be like, oh, men are trash. And like their most controversial opinions, like in one video, it was like every guy was saying something just like absurd about like race mixing or whatever. And sure, like I mean, sure, right?
You knew that was gonna happen.
But like in the videos that came from it, people's like controversial opinions were like very tame, and they were still getting like hate for it. And I feel like people they're being punished partially because it's like a social bit, right? To punish people for like very regular opinions.
And Steve, do you agree or disagree then? Because you say that you don't think it's happening as much.
So I think it's important to qualify that when you're taking your entire life and everything you care about and who you want to be with and build a life with and all your political views, all your social views, and you try to get that down to 450 characters for the average dating app, yes, you're self-censoring 99.9999% of your existence. And so...
Well, just so we're clear here, I just want to make sure, Steve, that we understand each other. The way that I see this conversation going right now, not so much on the dating apps. I want to open it up a little bit more towards relationships in general.
Okay, so that's helpful because dating apps are
Yeah.
an annoying intermediary between us and the relationships we ultimately seek. When it comes to the dynamics within relationships, I think that I look at it as this massive multivariate matrix, and we're constantly juggling different variables. And so sexual attraction can frequently start off pretty strong. Sometimes it grows in the first couple weeks, months, or years, and then it can very frequently wane, sometimes very quickly and abruptly, sometimes based on biochemistry, sometimes based on distance, sometimes based on competing alternatives. And that's just for one dimension of compatibility, which is your sexual chemistry. When we then factor in whether you share sound judgment around your financial planning, whether you believe in XYZ values, name any kind of values, those can all be on the chopping block for what kind of things will make or break a relationship. But then there's also, where is your life taking you? Is one of you going to end up abroad somewhere, and then it's going to be a long distance thing? It's going to cause a lot of strain. What are your love languages? So like, how do you actually communicate care and affection to this other person in your life, or these other people, if there's multiple? And at every single one of these stages, you can have friction and you can have misalignment. And ultimately, I think it's the Gottman Institute that said you should on average strive to have like 20 positive interactions for every one negative, in order to keep the relationship health ever stable and growing. And it can be really hard sometimes. And I think the self-censorship issue really crops up, at least from my understanding of like the way you're presenting it, is as you're trying, like, let's say you're aligned on 70, 80, 90 different dimensions and everything seems great, but there's a couple dimensions where you're like, I have these views and these might actually, like, is this going to be such a deal breaker that you're going to throw out everything we've built on the grounds that I happen to be harboring or stewarding, or just quietly considering this other view that maybe everyone doesn't agree with yet? So yeah, I see that can cause a lot of anxiety and consternation. And I think what's important is maybe before directly expressing your view or pretending that it's something that you hold very strongly, you can first check in with society at large. Like, what is the current, is there a consensus? Who are the people who share that consensus? Is this a thing where you already know your partner's opinion or thoughts? Are there existing, ways of breaking this to your partner that'll allow it to be more of an open-ended discussion? So, and that's just on any one dimension. Like this can occur for any topic. It's not something that is, it's not a strictly political thing. This can be, the same kind of potential self-censorship can come up if I've known people who have kinks that most people would probably find a little bit off-putting, disturbing, or just overtly bad. Like, they don't want that. They want nothing to do with it. And so, like, when do you bring that up? Do you bring it up first and foremost in the app you choose to go on? Do you bring it up like never in the relationship? Ditto for something like if you're bisexual and you have a heterosexual partner, you have a heterosexual partner, you're in a relationship that presents as heterosexual. Like, do you ever bring up your bi-curiosity or your bisexuality? Is that a thing that you should be wearing on your sleeve as part of your identity up front? Would that have compromised your relationship with a potentially heteronormative partner? Like, these are difficult questions to work through, but I don't know that the self-censorship I don't think it has a strictly political dimension. This is something that is just part of how we reveal ourselves to the people in our lives, whether it be our parents, our friends, our romantic partners, our coworkers and employers. It's really difficult to make these decisions, and it's never easy to know exactly how much to give. And I think that, once again, tact really helps us out here. A little bit of tact and some hard-earned wisdom.
Default friend, do you see things the same way as far as politics? Politics is there, but not the biggest part of the reason why people are self-censoring themselves? Or do you see it more as like this successor ideology, as the words have been uttered before, being something that does end up dominating a lot of people, especially on the coast, that does make it harder?
So look, self-censorship happens in dating, obviously, like both within a relationship And, you know, at every stage, for the obvious reasons they happen in friendships, it happens because you want to ingratiate yourself to other people. But I also think there's like a new set of social rules that make it more difficult and like more arcane, and it's difficult to know what will trigger people. And I think a lot of people are like holding back, you know, like they're afraid of offending people, and it's already hard. You're always going to like when people ask me for dating advice, which I like typically don't love to give, but like one thing that I always do say is like give people 3 dates, because like, you know, date 1 you're nervous, date 2 you're nervous, date 3 you're probably still nervous but you're a little bit more comfortable. And like that's the kind of self-censorship that I think is existent in all relationships. But the political thing is like an added layer.
I think like there's a great point that's brought up by Scum-Sucking Slimer in the chat. By the way, Lev, I can't believe it. Joel gave you the vote of confidence. If there's anyone to take dating advice from, it's Lev, because he's probably like, oh, God.
Wait, because he's probably what? I didn't read that one.
You got to read it for yourself, bro. Probably the one who's had sex on the panel with a woman. Fucking Joel, I love you, bro. I don't know. So, something Slimer says, human subjectivity and attraction, especially love, for fuck's sakes, is not reducible to a set of variables in an algorithm. I think like people are attracted to each other for a variety of like sub-rational or irrational reasons. I think that even compatibility is something like this came up the other day about someone was asking about your type. And I said that you can overcome your type because to me, that is largely a bricolage of unconscious, like grug brain, appetitive attractions to one particular facet.
Sure.
And I don't know, like, I mean, certainly it's important, but...
Well, that's a good question you're bringing up right now, actually, Gio. So when you're talking about
the type thing?
Well, not type specifically, but overcoming a particular thing. When it comes to... Yes, so kink was mentioned earlier by Steve. I know that's everybody's favorite word. So
there was a show back in the show, and if you're Canadian, you remember, called Kink, where it was a bunch of like people in the prairies into BDSM. This was right after Trailer Park Boys in the early 2000s.
Now, I don't want to specifically just talk about kink here, because I think kink is something that leads us into, I think, what is the meat of the discussion. But Default Fern, before we get to that meat, you do a podcast, like I said before, called After the Orgy. What does After the Orgy mean?
So it's not actually about sex. It's a podcast that's like sort of broadly about like desire in like literature and film. We sort of focus on like millennial like media properties. But we're out of that. But After the Orgy is like after this time of like decadence, like once everything's sort of been exhausted.
Well, when it comes to once everything has been exhausted, is this something that you see going on today when we had a lot of party-like atmosphere back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s? What exactly do you see right now when it comes to, because again, bringing it back to kink, what role do you see kink and kind of like this commodification of kink playing in the way that people interact with each other?
Yeah, I just read an article about this for Unheard. I feel like we've sort of, exhausted ourselves with kink, and now like things that are not unusual are becoming eroticized because we've kind of just like blown our brains out with all the erotic content, And so, I mean, I think like we've become really desensitized to it. Like what made kink enjoyable for a lot of people was this like taboo nature of it, and none of it's taboo anymore. And I am sympathetic to the argument that like removing that taboo creates easier access. But I think like some things are better kept as subculture or counterculture, and not made so available. The barriers of entry left a little bit high. And the stakes being high and there being a cost associated to it is, I think, what adds to the fun. And, I think people miss that.
Steve, do you kind of see that as well going on?
It's hard to say. I think that kink has been something that I feel people they've been given so much more access to at an earlier age. Like I know I got the internet when I was 10, so that was like maybe my age or privilege showing, but like that was my first foray into being able to like navigate and see what else is out there in the world. And by like 10 or 11, I'm already seeing certain kinks, even in pop-ups and in various websites. So I think that I'm personally like grateful that people can have sex modeled for them and things that are adjacent to sex modeled for them in a variety of ways, and that they can also find communities of others who share a desire to practice in that way. I think that like I don't necessarily want to go in the direction of commenting on whether like porn has gone too far in terms of its either availability, prevalence, or how it's become more isolated to the individual in the form of like an OnlyFans kind of thing. But I do generally support people having more outlets to find community around the things that they care about, that they want to learn more about. And so there's, there are kink parties you can still find in various cities. There's gatherings, there's munches. And so the social fabric behind the kink ecosystem is still in part there, although it's been, like, I guess economic forces have been attempting to shred it by virtue of taking away the payment processing behind all of these different kink apps and websites. That's been a hugely difficult problem. But for the average person, I just think kink has been more accessible to them. I don't think it's overly accessible because it's ultimately you who chooses to access it. And what's more important is just that you can find the thing you're looking for practiced in a way that gives you hope that you can do it yourself, or entertainment, that you see someone else enjoying themselves, ultimately that it's enjoyable.
Well, whether it's enjoyable, that's the big question, because is it the case or not the case that today millennials and Zoomers as well are having far less sex, not just because of the Backstreet Boys World Tour, but even before that, there was a downwards trend when it came to actually meeting up and having sex. I could be reading the wrong statistics here, so let me know.
So the statistics are like a little bit misleading. I mean, this is part of the problem, right? Like all of this research doesn't do a good job of describing what's going on. I've seen very interesting that I'm sympathetic to counter arguments. That's like people are having less sex, but perhaps higher quality sex. They also the news articles written about these statistics also miss that it's not just millennials and Zoomers who are having less sex, but actually part of the reason it's so low is because middle-aged and elderly people are having less sex as well, which I think it points to maybe something environmental.
Like the what is that thing that's supposed to turn the frogs gay? What is that?
Atrazine.
Atrazine, yes. So I mean that is another thing.
They don't turn gay; they turn her. They grow
they become hermaphroditic. So the male frogs become female, and that's another whole bag of worms when it comes to what exactly is going on in terms of our sexual nature. Even like, do you think that there is a lot of credence to the idea that a lot of these chemicals that we find in our water that people drink through the tap water, that is causing a change in terms of even like who we decide to pair up with? So I know, Steve, if you've done research when it comes to that or not, so feel free to skip it if you haven't. Not even just having less sex, but just in general, just changing the mindset of a person. Because I imagine that if the water is polluted, if the water's got all sorts of like birth control and all sorts of things in there, that is going to do something. I don't know. Am I mistaken here?
But also, like, what is the development of? Well, that's another question. So yeah, go ahead. See that.
Okay, this is a fun one. So I think that, to what Default Friend said, I do think that the quality of sex that is available to people is going up, as particularly dating apps make it easier for them to specify the kind of sex they want, the frequency of sex they want, the kind of people they want to have sex with. Like, it gives you that level of choice. And so in one sense, it's easier to pass up going to the bar and hoping to see what you get, and then, potentially leaving empty-handed at closing time, or getting extra desperate and then trying to see what comes after closing time. Like, the bar scene is not necessarily the most effective, nor has it ever been the most effective way to find access to sex for likely a majority of people. So dating apps have made it easier in a way that allows us to essentially say, I don't need to try to have sex Monday to Friday if I can just schedule sex for Saturday via someone I met on a dating app. Like that's a pretty straightforward thing that you can do, or you can at least schedule a date. So I think in one sense, less sex is not a bad thing. It's simply a recognition that we're more efficient when we do desire it. However, I'll also say that there are a lot of people who are recognizing that like sexuality is not their core or only dimension, and that there are other dimensions of ourselves that we're putting forth. So we now have a potential profile on dozens of different sites that capture different elements of us, the things we're working toward, the projects we're working on, the people we associate with, the causes we support. Like all of these different things capture dimensions of us that are now publicly available in such a way that it's almost like we're more interesting to one another because we can capture so many facets of ourselves across all these digital fora. So when you're seeing someone, you're not just thinking like, oh, they're attractive, I'm attracted to them, like I could have sex with that person. You're thinking like, I wonder where they work. I wonder what are the things they're up to. I wonder what their values are. Like it gives you, like we have more access to these things. And so we're not thinking about sex as the first thing. And I think there has been, and this goes not into censorship per se, but I think that there is increasingly a trend toward not thinking so much about sex straight away, or at least if you are going to do that, there's now a forum for you to do it. There's an app for that, as opposed to having to thrust that upon every person you meet just because you happen to be horny.
Do you think that people have more, and this is going to be a super broad, oh, and by the way, before that though, businessinsider.com, I'm not just wearing a foil hat, birth control pills could add 10 million doses of hormones to our water. There you go. There's the article. It's a legit website, so I was right. Anyway.
It's more than that, Lev. I mean, it is chemical. We are under chemical assault, but we are also under a cultural assault against certain form. Never mind, but you get the point.
No, Gio,
multifaceted thing.
No. This is a.
I mean, it's
I
the
think
seed oils as well. It's just the sort of. I mean, I wanted to ask like where. Finish your point, but just in general, like the research on like where kink comes from or develops, why certain paraphilias arise. That could be an interesting question as well if it relate. But anyways, go ahead, Lev.
No, I think that our 2 points can do the fusion dance and combine into one here. Are you a Dragon Ball Z fan, Steve? Growing up, because we're around the same period, right?
I've done Dragon Ball Z memes without ever being a fan, so I feel like I'm a total imposter and can't speak.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Speaking of which, Lev, I watched that anime film. My best friend, we watched it together. He watched it like 4 times. What's it called? What's your name? I think it's called.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's the one where like they're. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's like where they're connected by like they go into each other's bodies through time. You'd love it. It's like a romance thing. That
may be something that'll happen in the future. But then focusing on the future, my question for you, Steve, and for everybody here as well, is do you think that today, in general, like we're talking not just sex, not just relationships, but in general, do you think that people are more, I wouldn't even use the word happy, I'd use the word satisfied. Are people more and let's just get rid of 2020. Okay, let's throw 2020 aside. 2020 doesn't exist, okay? Just the trajectory that we've been going in general. Do you think that people have become more satisfied, or do you think people have become, and again, the super broad brush, obviously there's a lot of room for, different differences here, but broad brush, do you think that the majority of people in, let's say, the first world in the United States, just to keep it close, are more satisfied or less satisfied with what they're getting out of life?
Am I meant to tie in capitalism here?
Go for it.
I feel I mean, that adds this like oppressive umbrella on top of anything I'm going to say, because if you are working 80 hours a week and still barely able to make rent wherever you live, then like you're not going to be as happy as someone who has the wherewithal to not have to spend 80 hours of their week ensuring they don't die. So I think we just have less attention available. At the same time, like less of attention available to us because of being overworked through capitalism. At the same time, we have more attentional leaks in the form of our devices, which are omnipresent, always on, and always charging, and can like connect us to potentially millions of different spaces. And so our attention is under a kind of like pervasive and sustained assault, in the same way that our microbiome is under the same assault in America, thanks to, like Gio said, a combination of weird oils that are being like, you can go down any rabbit hole you want in that direction. You're probably going to find lots of truth, like almost more truth than conspiracy in terms of what's actively bombarding our bodies and our ecosystem.
Well, even like the history of things like birth control has come at a terrible cost. I mean, if you look at the early research they were doing in places like Puerto Rico, where like they were legit like sterilizing women by the thousands, you know, I mean, that also is a very complicated and like, I know I'm using the word like problematic history, because like ultimately all biomedical science, especially when it comes to like those areas. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned like people working 80 hours a week. I think like if you if the problem is if you had like that mindset, I think maybe younger people might eventually take the Varge pill and like
wait, hold on, context for Steve. Who's Varge?
No, God,
yes.
Don't make me do it. Oh, what the fuck is my old man doing? You know I'm on camera, right? Jeez, fuck. So the Varge pill is like living in a state of happy poverty, where you're like, if you truly wanted to have a wife and kids, then you would. You know what I mean? Like you would go out there, but it's just most people aren't willing to sort of do like a very nomadic, like agrarian type of existence. You know what I mean? It's just,
well, it does call a lot
like
from
there's
you.
so much expectation to like, even like the people I know that I grew up with, the only people that do manage to like get married and have children largely have very like advantageous circumstances.
But then this is kind of where we get to the meat. But I do want actually before the meat to ask default friend, same thing. More satisfied, less satisfied, on the whole, depends on where you go in the United States.
I mean, look, it depends. I think that I don't even want to say like rich, attractive people have more satisfied lives. I think for some people, like it's
the Great Reset, what that whole ad campaign is.
Oh God.
Because this goes into the meat, I think, of what we're talking about here. Because if the problem is, let's say, with capitalism,
but I mean,
then what the alternatives are being offered here, and this is kind of something that I've been noticing kind of creeping into the discussion as of late. So, Gio, take it away.
What about the Great Reset?
Well, in
Sorry,
general,
I was just distracted. My old man was trying to get my cat. And I don't know, because we have to keep them separated. Because like my one cat Hildy will fucking eat all of Gertrude's food, and so it's like we have to feed them separately. Like, but we're just trying to get Gertrude more accustomed to like going outside a little bit, because we like the indoor outdoor thing. Anyways, no, the Great Reset. I think like the plan. I mean, it's like, let's face it, it's a pipe dream by like rich people. And some people, I mean, that one guy we had on stream, oh my God, what was his name? He said like it was just a fantasy. But the sort of Great Reset, when people refer to, they mean like the World Economic Forum's, what they call the like fourth industrial revolution or post-industrial revolution, where society will be restructured in a way that is essentially like live in the pod. You're not going to eat, like meat is going to be like a treat. You're going to like work will become like an integrated life environment, the way it is for certain like Silicon Valley people, where there is no separation between like what is called work and what is called casual ordinary life. So like the 4-hour life will become the 12-hour. Not that I ever want to quote Paul Scholes ever again. Fucking guy blocked me. But the 4-hour life will become like your everyday. And so like the Great Reset is like this very scary, like ultra like atomized, like the logical conclusion to like neoliberalism being like having a sort of top down like totalitarian state that will like social engineer us into these semi-androgynous soy beings, I guess you could say. I mean, I'm being dramatic, but it's more or less like a way to restructure human life that is like going to like buck all of like the trends of like what any other like empire or grand civilization will be. I mean, some of the shit that they say is quite, quite like that, like the one you pulled up there, Lev, is like another, like you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, meaning like the gig economy and like the app and the rentership economy will be like your ordinary existence. Like you won't actually like ever like the thing about like the single family home is another thing which people like they're basically giving like a like BlackRock corporate agenda, this like woke paint job of like, well, the single family home is oppressive, therefore everyone has to become like certain parts of like you'll live in like these silo homes or whatever, right? Like it's yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is what I foresee happening. This, I would say, is the extreme example of what people have been bringing up. But Steve, since you're more around like I'm not saying Silicon Valley, but the Silicon Valley-ish world, around people who are much more within the tech sphere, I am kind of curious if you see certain reflections of what Gio was talking about right now in related to the way people think we can live.
So I don't think it takes being in the tech sphere to have, just had access to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, where they say that there's 60 million people who are freelancers in the US alone right now. So that's 60 million people who don't have healthcare coming from an employer, who don't have the comfort of being able to say, like, I can confidently tell you I have work next month, next week. It's a layer of instability that I think goes to your earlier question of like, do people feel better or worse than like 2 years ago? I think they feel a lot worse because the current forces that make life a little bit more shit each day haven't slowed. They've been accelerating, and there are pushback movements. Like I know a lot of people just in the past 2 years who've begun trying to move to a slightly more agrarian life, who've been cutting meat out of their diet, who've been trying to live more simply, divest themselves from any kind of companies who are putting money into causes that they don't believe in, divesting their own, even their addiction. Like you can call it self-censorship. You can also call it optimizing and modernizing your addiction so you can be more conducive to a life in which you get along with the people around you. So like there's a lot of different.
But don't you see
Default? What are you doing? Yeah. Don't worry about these people in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, but there is some, at least to me, there is some.
What are you doing, girl? Like just
there. Oh boy. Okay. There is some darkness here that I see though, Steve. Because if we're talking about the social diction, or
can I ask a question though?
Right.
Sorry,
Sure.
Lev, sorry.
No. Okay. Real quick. In this social diction that people are going to have to follow, if the algorithm and all kinds of things that are thrown into the algorithm are going to make people act more and more like not just minding your P's and Q's in terms of not being a dick, but in general, certain things that are considered healthy today and absolutely normal, and I'd say even certain things that are considered beautiful will have to be considered ugly in the future, and vice versa. I think we're already seeing this in the realm of art, for example, and I think that this may be something that's going to affect people in a very guttural way if, again, the algorithm takes control. Because when you're outside, when you're like living in the kind of agrarian lifestyle that you're talking about here, I don't necessarily see that as being the case. I think what you're talking about may happen more from, as Ted Kaczynski phrased it, over-socialization, when you're constantly having to be accountable to people who themselves are accountable to something higher. I'm not just talking about the CEO. The CEO is also accountable to this conspiracy drawn from idea. It's not like I'm imagining people sitting around, smoking the cigars in the room and thinking, ha, this is how we're going to control people. No, not that bullshit. It's basically certain trends that happen that people align with from the very top, and then if you don't act a certain way, and again, the amount of choices that you're going to have there, I'm concerned are going to become more and more limiting. And that is not the kind of society that I want to live in. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen or not in terms of artificial intelligence. Like, what exactly do you foresee happening there in terms of what I just mentioned?
So on one hand, I think that taking screen time away from us can be one of the healthiest things we can do. Definitely. Because this fear of having your opinions instantly come back to haunt you or drive people away from you is one that's born of the Twitterverse, where you can have an opinion one time, 6 years ago, and suddenly that prevents you from getting a job 6 years from now if you forgot to delete that one tweet, or if it was kept in someone's record, someone screenshotted it 10 years ago. So when we're sharing our opinions online, the fact that we're now really coming to grips with being universally tracked to an increasingly almost like desperately sensitive level, to like the number of feet we've moved in the last hour, our heart rate as we moved throughout our space, and like I don't know, I'm in the same boat. Like I'm wearing a watch, it's tracking my breathing. It's paired up with the same system that's tracking my website. Like it's all part of this. What
would Socrates think? Socrates was bemoaning the invention of writing.
Fucking walk. No, just like leave your
no.
Even more,
he would say that the nous, the divine breath, is robbed from us by this apparatus of.
No, I actually agree, because Socrates' whole thing was that he was bemoaning the invention of writing. Even if you think of something
because
like
it
writing,
degrades human memory.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, again, to kind of like flesh out this meat of the discussion, which does have to do with relationships, is that when we become these creatures who are dependent on external technology in order to facilitate our relationships. I even saw a post you made on Facebook where you were talking about this AI system writing messages for the person, because instead of hi, the AI said, no, that's too boring. You gotta, how about this or that? It's like, at a certain point, we become the Wall-E, Tubber people sitting in our chairs, not being able to make any choice. And at that point, what good are we as individuals? What good are we as people when we can't do anything ourselves? When everything is going to be done for us, we're not going to be able to think. We're going to be worse than the animals. We're not even going to have our instincts to guide us, because now we're just going to be trapped in this panopticon. Like, that's something that I want to avoid. So is there any discussion that you're seeing among people that you're speaking with, how to avoid that and how to just grow fruitful relationships and families and just get out of this whole weirdness that we're in right now, man?
Well, the challenge is that weirdness varies on a country-to-country basis. Like, there's some countries where Facebook is your entire internet, and most people don't have access to an internet beyond what Facebook tells them is real. And that, that can just be ads coming from your dictator that's telling you what real is. So I think that the panopticon is already very real for a lot of people. And if you look to China, they already have, in place the social credit score, where you can not smile for a day and suddenly you might not be able to board a flight because you were suddenly seen as less of a citizen because you weren't smiling consistently. I'm terrified of that becoming the level of technological intrusion into our day-to-day existence and into our day-to-day thoughts even. So I'm not, I'm not excited about that kind of a future. And I'm much more, there was a quote that was recently, I heard in a podcast that if I can't dance during your revolution, then I want no part of it. And so I think that humans at the individual level and collective level can really champion the things that they most want to see for their future and stand by that. So that's why I'm generally a fan of kink and self-expression as if this is the future that you want to have, then keep doing the things you're doing. And if you want to identify a certain kind of relationship or paradigm that you're really excited about, then at least now we have the ability that you can put a graphic of it in a dating profile and say hey, this is exactly what I want. Who wants this? And then you can have 10,000 people see your profile, and one of them might be well, shit, that's what I wanted. This is great. But yes, I agree. We've lost the ability to just walk outside. If I go to a new country without a phone in my hand and I have to and it's time for me to just flirt with someone, it's going to be really difficult, because a lot of we have been socialized in a certain way, out of directly coming on to people, and I think that's a good thing. Honestly, I think I'd be more creative and more effective if I wanted to date someone in a new city based on not being aggressively masculine. I don't know that that's the best thing, the best approach. I would typically...
But the interesting question to me is how many new cities are going to be in the future? Because if technology is going to kind of systematize everything, you're going to expect the same experience when you go to Tokyo, when you go to London. And I'm not saying that's the case right now. There may be certain signs, I don't know, maybe architecturally speaking. But there are certain conveniences which we do have in all the cities. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But my concern is that in a way, we may, with this algorithm, start to have less choices and start to become a lot more like, we can be like, I think we're going to be diverse when it comes to what we look like, but we're not going to be diverse when it comes to what we think. Because at the end of the day, like, I think like all the algorithms are just going to, even though there's a lot of options right now, I think that they may be starting to push people just into just the bare essentials. Get rid of language. Now we're using emoticons, emojis to express ourselves, kind of like the Egyptian hieroglyphics. It just seems like there's kind of like a lowest common denominator standard that may take over, not because somebody's plotting it, but simply because we're going to be lazy. And there's an interesting video by Chad Haig, who we had on the show, who lives in India, by the way, probably rides elephants and stuff, pretty interesting. But he actually moved to India, Steve, because his college loans were too much. So he decided to just go to India, become an expat. I mean, you kind of get that. You're kind of going all over the world. But anyway, he has a wonderful video called The Philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, the Incarnation of Ahriman. And over here, one of the things, okay, what provides the conditions for the incarnation of Ahriman, except the same inventiveness on the physical plane which has assumed the status of a religious value or technological innovation? Despite politically correct euphemisms, isn't the real end result of all this technological development just a pseudo-environment in which people binge on materialistic excesses to the point of falling into a state of drowsiness, which is exactly the kind of state which Ahriman requires us to be in? That is a state particularly susceptible to domination and manipulation from an external force. Now, let's set aside the external force and the Ahriman and all that, just focusing on the drowsy area of it. Like I said before, we have too many things that can be done for us by external means. We're going to wither away from the inside. And I know, Default Friend, you had a point that you wanted to bring up earlier, and I stepped on your point like an elephant in the jungles of India. So
no, it's
go for
okay.
it.
No, I mean, I think I was just gonna say something similar to someone said it in the chat too, that like, and I guess like you're also alluding to this, like, it's we're being sold like the illusion of free expression, like with respect to the kink point. And I feel like, Steve, maybe I've been like a little bit aggressive to you in this stream, and it's good natured. I'm being a little silly, a little goofy.
Some good natured ribbing.
Yeah, but
taking the piss.
The thing, I don't have a problem with people expressing themselves in the way they want to express themselves in. I take the kind of like unusual point though that it was more, to use a kind of a hokey word, it was more like nourishing when you had to like go to a subculture or a counterculture to express these desires. Because what happens now is like when they're sold to you via digital publications or like as literal products or through apps, people who don't really resonate with that are trying things that they really shouldn't, and it has a destabilizing effect. And most people really should just lead like a pretty normie life. And the problem with like everyone has access to everything is it creates the illusion that maybe someone would be happier being a little bit more creative than perhaps they're built to be. And it's a weird thing to express.
But how does like kink arise to begin with? I mean, there's so many different causal mechanisms that go into like, I don't know, how someone becomes a furry or something. Like, I don't know. It's like,
well, no, the furry. No, I know the furry. The furry pipeline.
Lev, obviously, it's
no. The furry pipeline is like Rouge the Bat, Sally Acorn. That's where it starts.
Oh my god!
Sonic the Hedgehog is the furry pipeline.
No.
Okay.
Sonic even, Lev.
Sonic even.
How come you didn't turn out into one? Like that's.
Who knows? But hold on. Steve, are you a Sonic fan?
I thought you were gonna go for Crash Bandicoot if you're OG, but.
Oh man, don't
I
ask
don't know.
him. No.
Crash was too. I know. I like Crash. In fact, it's very impressive what they were able to do with the PlayStation hardware in terms of getting all those graphics in there at the time. Very, very good job. But
anyways,
yes.
No, like the proliferation of it, I think like it's quite interesting. Like again, another like sort of various like pathologies that the internet has enabled in a way. I mean, The greatest. I mean, I know this is like a terrible, disgusting example, but have you ever watched the film one of like the last like pretty decent? Although they say he's getting better. One of the last decent Nicolas Cage films. You ever watch 8mm? Lev,
No.
you ever watched it? Okay,
No.
so
I want to see Snake Eyes.
he was that was all right, but it was kind of boring. Snake Eye. He was like a private detective, and he was this old matron, like this, like not madam. What's the name? Like the wife of a rich person, but like old money. What's the proper term? She discovered the snuff film in her husband's collection. And so she wanted to get Nicolas Cage, who was playing the detective, to like find it. And it was like in between like the first season of The Sopranos. So James Gandolfini, you know how he like stopped for a year to perfect that accent? He was in that film as like the sleazy porn recruiter. And it was like really fascinating. But he went to this porno shop in California, and Joaquin Phoenix was playing the attendant, right? It was one of those like private theater things, and they had to like physically go to this like grimy, like illegal porn store underground that was run by some cartel. And there was this one line of dialogue from Joaquin Phoenix's character where he said like, all this is going away, man. The internet's coming in, and now everything's going to be on the internet. And this was made in 1999. And I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking like the barrier, like what Default was saying. And of course, and this came up, I think, in their more recent After the Orgy podcast, where it's like the barriers to entry to like be a part of, I mean, could you call it a community? Maybe. Is like, it was so high back in the day. But it's just like nowadays, I mean, it's become almost banal in a way. Like you go on, what's that one site, FetLife? Like there's no like sort of dark mysticism towards any form of sexual or erotic expression. And it's like throughout human history, there was always sort of various taboos, not just about sexuality, but also around the sort of erotic ecstasies, both in the East and the West. And nowadays, it seems like it's such a foreign concept to us. Like I remember,
so the taboo makes it stronger. And
not just makes it stronger, but makes it more like nuanced and more. It's like even just to contemplate any sort of barrier to entry nowadays is almost unheard of. Like I remember there was this pamphlet they give you when you buy books from Shambhala, and they had tantric books, but you had to like submit your degree of like your particular Buddhist practice in order to even read them. And so people were saying like the thought of that is just so alien to us because information, we truly believe in this like Silicon, like if California ideology, like information shall proliferate throughout the world. But when you put barriers to that, it's like, it's almost like a novelty, but not really. It's like, I wonder if kink is the same way. If you put up these like artificial barriers, it becomes this like sort of postmodern reversion. Like now, like through the back door of postmodernity, you can have like some like super secret community, but it's like almost a LARP. It's like not authentic. It's not like the actual grimy porn store that you go to.
It's interesting that you bring it up, and I want to bring this to Steve. When it comes to there being barriers to entry, it seems, maybe this is always the case, but it seems like especially now, there seems to be in the general schema of kink, pornography, there are brighter colors. Like there's almost like Nick Jr., Dora the Explorer pastel colors. I'm not saying everywhere, but it just, that seems to be the energy. You could see that in the artwork of like, have you ever heard flat design? Mm-hmm. So like the Humans of Flat, that was a great account on Twitter. It doesn't exist anymore, but it just has, like all the blob people with the small heads and the big appendages. So there seems to be something unsophisticated about the kind of graphics that are deployed, the kind of colors that are deployed, almost like people are being treated as the lowest common denominator toddler. And I'm curious, have you noticed that pattern as well? Do you think this is reading too much into it? Do you think it may be a certain style that exists today and then it's going to change into something else? Or do you see that as being kind of like a trajectory in general of how we identify ourselves, where we seem to be less adults and more just stuck in this perpetual arrested development, if you will?
Well, given that there are kink and fetish sites that run the gamut from like things that are still websites. You mentioned FetLife Geo, like they still don't even have an app. They're still fully a web portal. They look a solid 10 years old or more, versus modern kink apps where they may or may not have fancier, more pastel-y colors. I am not familiar with ones that have gone in that direction. Although if it's a product that's tied to kink, then it's just basically going for the ClickFunnels approach of let's get you like hooked, let's get you engaged, let's show you what you need to know in order for you to make a purchase.
Well,
so that's
just as a quick aside, I'm not saying that this is for everybody. Obviously, there are people who do not color their hair, but there would be, in general, people who have like the brightly colored on a pink, purple hair. That would be much more common within circles like that. Again, I'm not saying everybody, but it just seems like there is a certain kind of like, I want to be going against the grain. I want to be the rebel. That seems to be the brand that's sold to people when a lot of these different kink-related things are adopted. There may be others which are a little bit more, let's say, leathery, a little bit more with laces, things like that. But in general, yeah.
A little more Foucauldian, Lev.
Yeah.
I believe last I checked, there's over 1,000 kinks that you can choose from on FetLife. So yeah, you're going to find some that are leathery. You're going to find some that are colorful. You're going to find some that tie in with your tie-dye hair. Like there's a kink for almost anything you can imagine, because there's probably someone else who would like to do that thing in a sexual manner. It doesn't mean that it needs to be there for you. It doesn't mean that you need to ever feel any pressure to do it. And I think that the important thing to remember is that rather than like having to pee on your partner in the off chance they like it, you can instead go to a place where there are communities where you can actually see it either in video or in photo up front and be like, oh, so that's what that's all about. And then you'll see kink educators on TikTok and on Instagram saying like, okay, this is how you can talk through this kind of a dynamic with your partner or with someone you just met. So we now have like way more educational resources available to us than ever before. We have way more diversity of both like the kinds of experiences. Like you can go to public kink munches where you're actually able to meet people and talk about your preferences before actually having to put yourself in a risky scenario. And long before you even show up at that, you might just find yourself on a platform like FetLife or any of the other kink apps. There's one. It's hard to say. There aren't that many kink apps realistically, because once again, it goes back to credit card processing. The terms of service make it so they usually can't accept money, and so they just fail because they can't make money. But when it comes to, at the very least, FetLife and any other platform where you can, maybe Tumblr, like Tumblr pre-2019, where you can share your like photos, videos of like what it is that you have as a kink. And
it's actually really good that you mentioned Tumblr right now, Steve, because default friend, you talk about Tumblr quite a bit and how you see it leading to the paradigm that we're currently in.
I just saw a tweet. Default friend, apparently you interviewed Thomas777 for your pod. Oh my God. I can't imagine a conversation between you and T777. My God. I can't wait for that one.
I was startled how much we agreed on things.
I know.
I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck?
We have to get him on desperately.
Starts.
I really want T77 on. I want to talk to him about death metal. But yeah, that. So default, what would you say, Lev?
Okay, so default friend, when it comes to Tumblr, I think, Steve, you may have misconstrued what I was talking about in relation to the diversity of various kinks out there. There definitely are different kinds of styles that one can go for within the actual kink. But if we're talking about just like this, and I think it does relate to Tumblr, I don't know, like default friend, help me out here in a way. Like when it comes to a certain kind of, I am not going to be part of what is considered to be like family oriented or community, or like I'm going to do the complete opposite. And that seems to be kind of just like this whole thing that, yes, there's differentiations in there, but they all share something in common. Like default friend. Do you know what I'm kind of going for here? It's difficult to describe.
Like, I think it's that it's sort of been framed as this option for everyone, and it's been very sterilized. And like the stakes just aren't there anymore. And I understand the desire to like lower the stakes for kink, right? Like on the one hand, I mean, it is great that there's like education on certain things available. But on the other hand, I think like, again, it goes back to that barrier of entry thing. I mean, with respect, it's become like another product you could like pick off the shelf. When it's shrouded in a community where there's like some sort of initiation ritual and you have to work to find the community and work to join it, then it becomes too easy, and people who shouldn't be exposed to it are. And I understand why.
But have we no moral shame nowadays, default friend?
No, I mean, because it's just not seen. It's not seen as any different than like buying lingerie or like buying a certain brand of phone. Like we all sort of think about these things through the same lens, I think. And yeah, sure, people's disgust response like kicks in. Like you can't just like pee on your date, right? But like much, to bring up Steve's example, but like, on the other hand, I think that more and more people are treating it like it's meaningless and it has no impact on you, and you could, be infinitely exposed to these experiences without any consequence. And I don't think that's true.
What do you mean by not exposed to a consequence? Like, what do you see are some consequences?
I just don't think everyone. First of all, I think like some of these sex acts are probably like, even if they're not like straightforwardly traumatizing, they have like an impact on people. Like they're not a good experience for people, and there's this sense of like needing to try everything and please everyone, especially when you get into like big cities and people and women are competing for like a certain caliber of man. Of course, this is not every woman. This is not everyone going on a date. This is not everyone in the country, but it is something that's happening. I don't want to overly generalize, but it has an effect on people. I don't think you could have like an infinite number of sexual partners. I don't think you could try an infinite number of things. Like these create bad memories and bad experiences, and people act like that it should be okay to try anything that they want.
Well, that I think is the meat right there. Whether, that old expression, do people have ideas or do ideas have people? What are we, let's say, like, who are you to say what A, B, and C should do? And I'm kind of of that opinion. Like, I never want to have any kind of system where somebody, by force, by fear of like death or exile or whatever, that they would force people not to do certain things. I believe that people should have the freedom to try different things out, while at the same time, I do believe that there should be some kind of structure to help people when they're the youngest figure things out, have good role models. But Steve, like when it comes to what Default Friend said right now regarding these potential bad situations, do you see that as being necessarily the case or no? And by the way, after this, since I know that we're going to the 2-hour mark, we're going to be reading super chats and then wrapping it up.
So I just don't understand why kink is a relevant zone to focus on here. It's like there are things that kids are being exposed to that are way worse than kink will ever be. Like I grew up right in the middle of a war, and so I was able to watch beheadings live as a 12-year-old. So
on live leaks, you mean, or like actually?
Steve, like, why does it have to be
not in person?
I don't understand why it's
yeah.
Did you grow up in Eastern Europe in the 90s?
Yeah. I don't think that's fair, because first of all, it's part of the same paradigm that like we're like desensitizing people to everything because everything's considered a piece of media that is like equal to be exposed to. Like if you have a problem with like live leak, then you have a problem with Teen Vogue, giving ostensibly 16-year-olds exactly, or like how not to catch feelings after that anal sex. Like maybe you don't have a problem with that, but like you shouldn't develop feelings for the person who just like puts you up your ass.
That's the worst part, not catching feelings.
No, but I think like there was this thread that I did a video on, genreproductions at youtube.com, where it was like that. It was terrible. I really went off. That the one YouTuber saying like, as millennials, we grew up with some terrible shit. And you Zoomers, you want to censor things. And I think like the difference is like when you're an older millennial, as I think all of us are here, more or less, and you like grow up and I don't know, your friend like shows you meat spin or racist beheading videos Goatsy, like the single site shock, right? I think that's different. Like it's traumatizing to a degree, and like you find some odd humor on it. Like you go, I don't know, you go to stickdeath.com or you go to Newgrounds, right?
Goats say that. Well, goats say that's a kink, by the way. The
in size, yeah. But I think the difference between that and what the internet nowadays is that there wasn't like a huge push to be like, well, like normalization's like such a played out word, but I think like the difference is that there's much more of a like corporate commodity aspect to slotting people within different kinks and like selling them either through OnlyFans or whatnot, and sort of like on one end taming them to the extent that they can be marketed to like a majority of people, but on the other end ignoring the absolute like more like deeper consequences on a psychological or I would even say metaphysical level to like certain practices, right? I think like the Zoomer grows up in an internet that is in one sense much more corralled, but in the other sense, the things that were perceived as shocking is almost like tame and in a lot of ways bought and sold to you directly. So I think that's like the difference between like being exposed to like Lemon Party when you're a kid and like, I don't know. Where am I going with this, Lev? I had a friend actually who, you remember when RuneScape was really popular, Lev? Did you play RuneScape?
Sure. I never played it.
He set up a meat spin mirror site, but he called it I still remember to this day, runescape.666.tk, and he would like write it down. He'd say that there's like RuneScape cheat codes. So he would give it to people. This guy was a bastard. He went to juvie and everything. So shout out to my boy Richard if you ever see this one day. So.
I know. Well, I did want to get just like final thoughts from Steve regarding that statement. Again, I think we're beating a dead horse already when we're talking about this. Like, Steve, I don't know, do you have conversations like this often, like when it comes to people voicing concerns about this commoditization of a lot of these things? This is something that gets brought up frequently. And again, my position regarding this, like I don't really care what people do, but at the same time, I do want to have more of, I don't know how to do it, more of some kind of a way for there to be, I don't know, more pillars in the virtual community, I guess, people to look up to that can actually guide people towards not being, how do I say this? Not having to constantly be thirsty, not having to constantly rely upon getting their fix of certain, whether it's pornography or whether it's anything else. Like, I want people to maximize the amount of satisfaction that they have, and having to rely on external substances, whether it's just like things that are done for you all the time. Like I said in the very beginning, it minimizes that in my opinion. So in general, the more pressure there is, I think the more people can work, from that pressure and build something great. Meanwhile, if you already have everything you need, why work? Why do anything? Why live? So it's trying to find a balance between that while at the same time not forcing that. Because I know that there are a lot of people online who are very dissatisfied with the way things are, and they think that it makes sense to just have some kind of a dictator come in and, enforce what is considered to be trad pill so that everybody act the right way, and then everybody's going to follow suit. I don't think that's ever
such a character, Lev. You always bring that up.
Because that literally does happen. And it did happen in history.
We should have had Joel Davis on the stream. He would have set us straight.
Next time.
Didn't he ask?
Yeah. No, someone asked him. Someone asked and he's like, I'm not interested. I'm like, you
Next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe Bang Pow Davis. Joel to the Moon Davis. Anyway.
Bang Zoom too.
Anyway, so before we get to super chats, I don't know, like, just final
Oh,
thoughts.
I wanted to ask one thing, but because okay, we mentioned about healthcare.
Yes.
Geo, meet me of fun. You bring monk robes. Yes, I will bring monk robes. Okay, so in Canada, healthcare is like pretty like abysmal and shitty, especially if you have a long-term thing. Like, but in America, how did it come about that healthcare is tied specifically to your employer? Because that seems like an odd like residue, like a very destructive residue of like that Protestant work ethic sort of thing, like work becomes your life. Like, how did that even happen in America? Isn't it like, wouldn't it make more sense to tie it to each person, so when you do find more like employment opportunities elsewhere, but they don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, this is a whole 3-hour discussion in itself. Canadian American healthcare.
We'll definitely have it next time around. But in general, Steve, just the first question, because I said too much. The first question was, is this a conversation that's often had for you, or is this something generally new? Just like any thoughts you have on the conversation?
So no matter what, I always have to address this with my clients and my friends, anyone who comes to me for dating help, because the first thing I have to acknowledge is like, do you hate forcibly unidimensionalizing yourself, like shoving all of you, everything you stand for, through a screen interface into an app that can then own your data, do all their shit with it, and hopefully algorithmically result in something useful for you? Or can we also talk about what your offline strategy looks like? You know, how many people do you bring into your life? What are the kinds of human connection you're actually hurting for? Is it sexual touch? Is it just being able to talk to people and be excited about the things that you share? Is it going and doing things together and exploring the city that is maybe new to you? So I think for me, it's always like, we as humans have the capacity to connect with one another and to have a completely enjoyable life. Like we have these skills, they're endemic to us in our physiology. When we meet other people, we're capable of being kind to them. There's nothing ever causing us to be actively unkind to someone else or to give them shit for no reason. Like, it's a choice we make each time.
Yeah.
So the next question is, can we use the internet to make your life a little bit better? And so in the case of people looking for relationships, the answer is sometimes, yes, sometimes it helps a lot, especially if you need to quickly narrow down, not waste time, and see who is in my area, who might be interested in me, the person. If you get to the point where you are treating others' reaction to your two-dimensional persona on a dating app as something make or break for your own personal identity or self-confidence, then you're at a level where you've given over controls to your own happiness and well-being to an app and to sheer chaos and randomness and systemic market forces. So like, I always tell people, like, it's critical that you maintain the ability to derive happiness from things that are inherently joyful and good. And most of those things will be found offline. It's like a shared meal with a friend or relative. It's going outside and just like staring at the dirt and waiting till something moves, and then keep it watching that thing, follow some worms, see how they're doing, check out the squirrels, wherever you might find squirrels. I don't know if you have a yard. If you have, go to a park.
I got
do some people
turkeys.
Watching.
I got some turkeys in the yard.
You go outside, you'll see people living and engaging with one another. Like, I think going outside is a big piece of this. And the challenge right now that we're seeing is that there's a younger generation that was, in one sense, in the last couple of years, not allowed to go outside. But also, if you didn't develop your self-concept yet, like as an individual, someone without a screen-based interface governing your life gets a lot harder, because you can throw away your phone and be like, well, that sucks. I can't really, without Google Maps, I'm kind of shit getting around. But like, I can still engage with people around me. I can still talk to them. I can still order coffee somewhere. I can still probably get a job, hopefully. But if you're someone growing up as a teenager right now, where you don't have that much time spent in like absent screens, I've seen 1-year-olds holding a phone, like playing phone games, being addicted that early. And you have, pernicious platforms like Facebook that are using things like Instagram to just forcibly send you down these spirals of either self-loathing or loathing of others. loathing of your entire species. I just got recommended a group for voluntary human extinction on Facebook. I'm like, thanks, Facebook. Great. You're really,
Oh God.
you're really helping out here.
That reminds me of the Church of Euthanasia. I don't know if Gio, you remember that.
Oh yeah, that was Nina Paley, wasn't it?
I think she was involved with that. Yeah, a bit. Nina Paley, great friend of the show.
She went on Springer.
Yeah, but anyway, Steve, I think that those are great points and very important things for us to consider. In fact, the comedian Tim Dillon was talking about how people do unite together over the things they hate. Not so much over the things that they like. As for example, like Gio, think of all the times that on Twitter, what's the juiciest content? Usually it's just like complaining about...
I do that every day.
Yeah, women posting their L's. It's like people are...
Shout out to James.
Yeah, shout out to James. So we are going to go into Super Chats right now, but in general, I just want to say that... I do want to, as fun as it is to hate things, to find like, ooh, like this person said this and this person said that, and having this clash. I do appreciate when people are civil. I think that is the mark of a civilization, and it's important for me and BTR in general, I think, to strike a good balance between asking the questions that don't often get asked. And this is why, again, I'm gonna hold you to it, Steve. How often do people address any of this stuff at all in general, like when you speak with them? Is this something that gets often talked about, or no? If it's difficult to put a number to it, you could say like 50-50, or I don't know.
I need you to qualify this stuff, because I do have people who say things like, I hate putting myself onto two dimensions. I hate writing bios like that. I don't know if that's not, I guess that's not what
No. I'm talking about more of this perception of this technological dystopia, doom and gloom, the self-censorship, all this stuff. Is this stuff that gets discussed in the history of, let's say, the last several years of you speaking with people? Is this something that often gets brought up?
Yeah, I think techno dystopia is 100%. Like, I speak at dating conferences where there's app builders and funders showing up to say, like, what's happening in this industry? Is it still profitable? What does growth look like? But also, like, we have people who focus on human-centered design who show up, and they'll be able to say, like, this is what it's doing to people's minds. This is what it's doing to people's confidence. This is what it's doing to their sex lives. And so I think that the industry itself is able to recognize the harm that it creates, but it also is stuck in the capitalist institution umbrella where it's hard. Like, the apps that there was an app that actually united people based on what they hated, and I was really excited about it. They had a blog post every week for like the top hated thing that people bonded over that week, and they went out of business. And so maybe hating things is not enough. Maybe
I thought you meant Twitter.
Yeah, that's the new one.
Man.
All right, it's Super Chats time, everybody.
Oh, but can you answer my question? Do you guys know why healthcare is tied to your employer in the States?
Probably racism.
I guess that's the answer for everything. But I wonder, though, that is, if
it's
anyone
terrible.
in the chat...
It's the worst idea we've had. I think it was when they were trying to get more people post-war to follow stable career paths so they can have a job, get a house, and make babies.
That makes sense.
And it was just an easier way of offloading responsibility from the government to individual employers. But I think that's god awful when you have 60 million people who don't have employers and are still in need of healthcare.
Yeah,
we need to get out of that system pretty soon.
They didn't factor in the need economy. The need
I am still. I imagine that there could be solutions that can crop up from the bottom up. I am very concerned about any top-down solutions here, because again, there's not going to be any incentive, in my opinion at least, for people within the government to do anything good. Why? It's like they're going to be just like any other industry, but even less.
Nowadays.
Yeah, but even less beholden. Which is, again, like, to sum up, Steve, what I think the concern is, one part of it that hasn't been touched on, I think, as much today. I think the concern is that people don't want to live in a society. We live in a society. People don't want to live in a society where there's going to be an overabundance of people that are not going to have the capability to make good decisions, who are going to be beholden to a top-down governmental system that will feed them, clothe them, do everything for them. And that doesn't mean that there should be ruthless institutions that, wouldn't be able to pay people a decent living wage as well. But I always just want to err on the side of caution of any figure that comes out and says that, I am for the people, I'm going to help the people. At the end of the day, I think most of these people are fucking grifters, and they don't care about you, they don't care about any of us, and they want to control us, and I don't want them controlling me or anybody here. So that is just the thing that I wanted to get out of the way. And now, super chat time. Here we go. We got a lot of super chats today, guys.
Oh, wait, Default didn't say her final thought.
Oh, yeah. Final thoughts. Default friend. Go.
I mean, look, I think that it's easier than ever for attractive people who don't let their attractiveness go to their head to date. And everyone else is fucked.
Oh, nuclear black pill.
I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to generalize.
There we go. Here we are. Super chat time. That was well said, default friend. Okay. The ABC 123456399, $10. Somebody timed me out for simping for Chad, so I sneed. Thank you so much for the sneed.
Thank you, brother.
Another one from the ABC, $5. How do I go from down tremendous to regular neutral? I don't know what that's referring to. Does anybody know?
Down bad? That's like...
He's super horny.
Oh, there we go. This is the stream for the horniest people. That's BTR.
On the
this
planet.
Is where on the planet. Horniest people on the planet. Subscribe right now, by the way. Why aren't you subscribing? The people who are watching this, the people who have come from default friend, I know you're out there, and I know you did not subscribe yet. Go there. Click on the subscription right now. I know you want to. I know you need to. I know you need to. Anyway, David Macram, $10. Boomer here. Boomer here. It seems to me people who grew up with their fantasies at their fingertips via the internet don't find a human to have a relationship. I'm sorry.
Just read it without the act, please. God.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Boomer here. It seems to me people who grew up with their fantasies at their fingertips via the internet don't want to find a human to have a relationship with. They are looking for their fantasy partner. Thoughts? Quick thoughts.
Yeah.
Totally true. Read Cherry Turkle.
I think people
Wait, Turkle, isn't that the janitor from One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Great movie,
No
by the
idea.
way. I think that people
Speaking of Turkle, here's my turkey impression. Let's see if I can do it properly. Yeah.
Oh God, no, don't. You still have that turkey from the Turkey Tom stream, by the way?
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. I gotta take it out of the box.
I think that people, like men in particular, when you fall in love with a certain ideal of a person, I think that becomes the image from which you pursue. It becomes a sort of weird personalized archetype, and that can lead to the throes of rejection and disappointment. You, in a sense, you place whatever attribute into that desired object, but it's entirely aesthetic and image based. I want my big titty goth GF whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Next super chat, the ABC once again $2. Gio, what do you think of Eric Bugenhagen de Bugez?
I haven't heard of him. I heard the NXT just signed him. Apparently he's based. A bunch of my mutuals on Twitter follow him. So I don't know. I don't like a lot of the jokey stuff though. WWE, apparently he did something with Shinsuke Nakamura, and WWE, they fucking ruined Nakamura. I hate it so bad, man. The King of Strong Style. He's fucking joke comedy act now,
All right, next is from the great Tux Loves You, who is also a member of our great Discord. $5 super chat. Sneed and then subsequently feed those super chats. Thank you so much for the super chat.
Brother.
Lisa Bode, €199. What's really a turn off? A man, female can have it all. What? I don't know what that means.
What?
Does anybody know what that means? Steve, do you know what that means? I don't know. Anyway.
Read it again, Lev?
Okay. What's really a turnoff? A man, female can have at all. It's the at symbol and all. What's going on here? Let's move on. Come on.
I don't know.
Rex Williams, $5 Patreon. Woo! We did it. Another Patreon, patreon.com/break the rules. You know it, you love it, you want it, you need it, you sneed it. Become a Patreon today at patreon.com/break the rules. I guarantee you're going to have a great time. This week, we're going to do is it this week? Yes, this week, I'm going to plan on doing a Patreon only stream, only for your lucky patrons. It's going to be for you. So go ahead. We're going to have plenty of perks, plenty of kinks, plenty of things for you to get when you become a patron. $20 gives you a beautiful wooden magnet, which I don't have over here, but trust me, it's really good. I want to show you something. This over here, this is the trophy that I got at the 2006 Ottawa Animation Festival for my movie Piper the Goat and the Peace Pipe. Since we were packing, I just happened to have it right here, so there we go.
It looks like a butt plug, Lev.
Oh! Oh my God, it does! Oh man.
Good catch, default friend. Anyway, yeah, but as you can see, it's a little bit sharp over here, so that's it's not great. Okay, anyway, next we have super chat. Speaking of kink is stink. That is from Opinion Discarded.
God.
That is from Steve.
Opinion's discarded. I love that line.
Yeah, are you gonna discard that opinion? Kink is stink.
I mean, you can kink or not kink all you want. I don't care. That's
some kinks are of stink though.
That's true. Like
some people do. Like I mean, there's the fucking brat people online. It's like what do you? Never mind.
Yes.
Terrible.
Anyway, we're almost done. The ABC once again. The ABC, you are on fire today. $2. If it ain't based, it's debased. I think it's similar like Kink is stink. Then we got final $10. What? $10? That is amazing. Thank you so much. Opinion discarded. Here we go. The 200 IQ crowd chanted in unison, wubba lubba dub dub, while beating their chest towards the co-working worker. I put my shirt over my head and let out the purest "ree" to show my devotion to Rick. There we go.
Oh, that's a classic shit post right there.
Steve, Rick and Morty fan.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Oh, God.
All right.
Oh, man.
I mean, here we go. This is it. This is the end of the stream. I want to thank... Well, okay, final question, just out of curiosity. Steve, are you interested in any spiritual stuff, religion, spirituality? Where are you there? That may be too broad of a thing, but it just curious, like.
No, not other than like dicking around on astrology-based dating apps because sometimes they have more user engagement than traditional apps. That's about the extent of which I go. I'm generally pretty atheist in most of what I do.
The reason why I ask is there was one writer, lecturer, whoever you want to call it, that I recently got into, who has, I think, a lot of practical things like beyond any of the woo stuff. His name is Rudolf Steiner. He was the guy who founded the Waldorf schools that are still, there's a lot of Waldorf schools everywhere. So if you're interested, take a look at his work. He has a lot of lectures online. And this is for everybody, by the way. Very interesting dude, Rudolf Steiner. Take a look at his stuff. I was recently listening to his podcast. So that's just as a side for people who aren't even spiritual. I think that there's a lot of great advice that Steiner has. Anyway, we are almost at the end. Final plugs. So first, we are going to go to Steve Dean. Steve, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you spending time with us here on Break the Rules. We always bring people together who may not we're not going to have something like this happen otherwise, this is a rare and beautiful thing that we get to have this exchange of ideas. And this is why I keep doing BTR, and I'm going to keep doing it with your help. So anyway, follow Steve Dean on Twitter, twitter.com/Stephen M. Dean. There we go. You are the dean of your inner university, which is full of a lot of knowledge and insight, Steve, and I really appreciate all the knowledge and insight that you were able to disseminate to us today. Default friend, thank you so much for coming and for showing your face, not for the first time, but for the blurst time. Thank you so much.
The best of times. It was the blurst of times. It was the thousand monkeys, Mr. Burns, yeah.
Oh, I love those monkeys. So follow Katherine D, default friend, on Twitter at default. Is that a hyphen? What is that thing?
Yeah.
hyphen friend
Underscore.
underscore. Oh man, okay. That's
What moral outrage? Giant fist kink called. Oh my god.
all right. Next
Oh,
over
God.
here, twitter.com/LevPo. Follow
Oh
me
wait,
on
no, you didn't plug it right.
Hold
You
on.
gotta follow. Go to default friend Substack.
Oh yes.
And I think there's a separate site now for After the Orgy because it used to be on your Substack, but now it's like separate.
It was alienating all the Catholic priests who read my, I swear to God, it's very, I have no idea what the hell is going on
Oh
here.
man, there you
Well,
go.
they have a lot of orgies in the Vatican. You remember that story about the Vatican bathhouse, Gio?
They're in the 60s after Vatican II. There was rumors that the nunneries in particular. Never mind, I don't know.
Okay,
But
here's
the good
the
thing is that
Apple-
John Paul II cleaned everything up, so don't worry about it.
Here's the After the Orgy on Apple Podcasts. Please follow After the Orgy. Please follow Default Friend Substack at defaultfriend.substack.com. And, of course, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you want relationship coaching from Steve Dean, I am going to link up to his website right now. Just give me a second over here. And, of course, follow Gio on Twitter, twitter.com/giantgio. Here we go.
There's my link tree in the bio, so you can find my Instagram,
Yes.
my YouTube channel. I never plug my Instagram. Shit, I have to.
Yeah.
I have to engage. I have to like grind more on Instagram to tell you the truth. But you know,
And here we go. So date working is where you go. So there is the Facebook page, actually, facebook.com/dateworking for any of the boomers who are, Gio is my king, for any of the boomers who are on Facebook. There is there is an Instagram page, and then there is the good old dateworking.com. That is where you go to. So here is the Instagram page, dateworking.com. Let me load that one up as well. Go there, get to know Steve. Steve's a great dude. I really appreciate him spending time here.